head have a number of other formal aspects, some of which it may be useful to indicate here. Thus, self-renunciation is common to the holy with the unholy, to the pure and the impure. The impure man renounces all better feelings, all shame, even natural timidity, and follows only the appetite that rules him. The pure man renounces his natural relation to the world, renounces the world, and follows only the desire which rules him. Driven by the thirst for money, the avaricious man renounces all admonitions of conscience, all feelings of honor, all gentleness, and all compassion. He puts all considerations out of sight. The appetite drags him along. The holy man behaves similarly. He makes himself the laughing-stock of the world, is hardly hearted and strictly just, for the desire drags him along. As the unholy man renounces himself before mammon, so the holy man renounces himself before God and the divine laws. We are now living in a time where the shamelessness of this holy man and of the holy is every day more and more felt and uncovered, whereby it is at the same time compelled to unveil itself and lay itself bare more and more every day. Have not the shamelessness and stupidity of the reasons which men antagonize the progress of the age long surpassed all measure and all expectation? But it must be so. The self-renouncers must, as holy men, take the same course that they do as unholy men, as the latter little by little sink to the fullest measure of self-renouncing vulgarity and lowness, so the former must ascend to the most dishonorable exaltation. The mammon of the earth and the God of heaven both demand exactly the same degree of self-renunciation. The low man, like the exalted one, reaches out for good, the former for the material good, the latter for the ideal, the so-called supreme good. And at last both complete each other again too, as the materially minded man sacrifices everything to an ideal phantasm, his vanity, and the spiritual-minded man to a material gratification, the life of enjoyment. Those who exhort men to unselfishness think they are saying an uncommon deal. What do they understand by it? Probably something like what they understand by self-renunciation. But who is the self that is to be renounced and to have no benefit? It seems that you yourself are supposed to be it. And for whose benefit is unselfish self-renunciation recommended to you? Again, for your benefit and behoof, only that through unselfishness you are pronouncing your true benefit. You are to benefit yourself, and you are not to seek your benefit. People regard as unselfish the benefactor of men, as Franca, who found the orphan asylum, and O'Connell, who works tirelessly for his Irish people. But also the fanatic who, like Saint Boniface, hazards his life for the conversion of the heathen, or like Robespierre, sacrifices everything to virtue, like Cornar dies for God, king, and fatherland. Hence, among others, O'Connell's opponent tried to trump up against him some selfish or mercenariousness, for which the O'Connell fund seemed to give them a foundation, for if they were successful in casting suspicion on his unselfishness, they would easily separate him from his adherents. Yet what could they show further than that O'Connell was working for another end than the ostensible one? But whether he may aim at making money or at liberating the people, it still remains certain in one case as in the other that he is striving for an end, and that is his end. Selfishness here is there, only that his national self-interest would be beneficial to others too, and so would be for the common interests. Now, do you suppose unselfishness is unreal and nowhere extant? On the contrary, nothing is more ordinary. One may even call it an article of fashion in the civilized world, which isn't considered so indispensable that, if it costs too much in solid material, people at least adorn themselves with its tinsel counterfeit and feign it. Where does unselfishness begin? Right where an end ceases to be our end and our property, which we, as owners, can dispose of at pleasure, where it becomes a fixed end or a fixed idea, where it begins to inspire, enthuse, fantasize us, in short, where it passes into our stubbornness and becomes our master. One is not unselfish so long as he retains the end in his power. One becomes so only at that. Here I stand, I cannot do otherwise. The fundamental maxim of all the possessed. One becomes so in the case of a sacred end, through the corresponding sacred zeal. I am not unselfish so long as the end remains my own, and I, instead of giving myself up to the blind means of its fulfillment, leave it always an open question. My zeal need not on that account be slacker than the most fanatical, but at the same time I remain toward it frostly cold, unbelieving, and its most irreconcilable enemy. I remain its judge because I am its owner. Unselfishness grows frank as far as possessiveness reaches, as much on possessions of the devil as on those of a good spirit, their vice, folly, etc., here humility, devotion, etc. Where could one look without meeting victims of self-renunciation? There sits a girl opposite me who perhaps has been making bloody sacrifices to her soul for 10 years already. Over the buxom form drops a deathly teared head, and pale cheeks betray the slow bleeding away of her youth. Poor child! How often the passions may have beaten at your heart, and the rich powers of youth have demanded their right. When your head rolled in the soft pillow, how awakening nature quivered through your limbs. The blood swelled your veins, and fiery fancies poured the gleam of voluptuousness into your eyes. Then appeared the ghost of the soul, in its eternal bliss. You were terrified. Your hands folded themselves. Your tormented eyes turned their look upward. You prayed. The storms of nature were hushed. A calm gilded over the ocean of your appetites. Slowly, the weary eyelids sank over the life extinguished under them. The tension crept out unperceived from the rounded limbs. The boisterous waves dried up in the heart. The folded themselves rested a powerless weight on the unresisting bosom. One last faint, "Oh dear!" moaned itself away, and the soul was at rest. You fell asleep, to wake in the morning to a new combat and a new prayer. Now the habit of renunciation cools the heart of your desire, and the roses of your youth are growing pale in the chlorosis of your heavenliness. The soul is saved, the body may perish. Ole, O Ninon, O well you did to scorn the pale virtue. O free grisette, against 1,000 virtues make ray and virtue. The fixed idea may also be perceived as maxim, principle, standpoint, etc. Archimedes, to move the earth, asked for a standpoint outside it. Men sought continually for the standpoint, and everyone seized upon it as well as he was able. This foreign standpoint is the world of mind, of ideas, thoughts, concepts, essences. It is heaven. Heaven is the standpoint from which the earth is moved, earthly doings surveyed and despised. To assure to themselves heaven, to occupy the heavenly standpoint firmly and forever, how painfully and tirelessly humanity struggled for this. Christianity has aimed to deliver us from a life determined by nature, from the appetites as actuating us, and so has meant that man should not let himself be determined by his appetites. This does not involve the idea that he was not to have appetites, but that the appetites were not to have him, that they were not to become fixed, uncontrollable, indissoluble. Now, could not what Christianity, religion, contrived against the appetites be applied by us to its own precept, that mind, thought, conceptions, ideas, faith, must determine us? Could we not ask that neither should mind or the conception, the idea, be allowed to determine us, to become fixed and inviolable or sacred? Then it would end in the dissolution of mind, the dissolution of all thoughts, of all conceptions. as we there had to say, we are indeed to have appetites, but the appetites are not to have us. So we should now say, we are indeed to have mind, but mind is not to have us. If the latter seems lacking in sense, think, e.g., of the fact that with so many a man thought becomes a maxim, whereby he himself is made prisoner to it, so that it is not he that has the maxim, but rather it that has him. And with the maxim he has a permanent standpoint again. Doctrines of the catechism become our principles before we find it out, and no longer brook rejection. Their thought, or mind, has the sole power, and no protest of the flesh is further listened to. Nevertheless, it is only through the flesh that I can break tyranny of mind, for it is only when a man hears his flesh along with the rest of him that he hears himself wholly, and it is only when he wholly hears himself that he is a hearing or rational being. The Christian does not hear the agony of his enthralled nature, but lives in humility. Therefore, he does not grumble at the wrong which befalls his person. He thinks himself satisfied with the freedom of the spirit. But if the flesh once takes the floor, and its tone is passionate, indecorous, not well disposed, spiteful, as it cannot be otherwise, then he thinks he hears voices of devils, voices against the spirit, for decorum, passionlessness, kindly disposition, and the like is spirit, and is justly zealous against them. He could not be a Christian if he were willing to endure them. He listens only to morality, and slaps unmorality in the mouth. He listens only to legality, and gags the lawless world. The spirit of morality and legality holds him a prisoner, a rigid, unbending master. They call that the mastery of the spirit. It is at the same time the standpoint of the spirit. And now whom do the ordinary liberal gentlemen mean to make free, whose freedom is what they cry out and thirst for? The spirits! That is the spirit of morality, legality, piety, the fear of God. That is what the anti-liberal gentlemen also want, and the whole contention between the two turns on a matter of advantage, whether the latter are to be the only speakers, or the former are to receive a share in the enjoyment of the same advantage. The spirit remains the absolute lord for both, and their only quarrel is over who shall occupy the hierarchical throne that pertains to the vicegerent of the Lord. The best of it is that one can calmly look upon their stir with the certainty that the wild beasts of history will tear each other to pieces, just like those of nature. Their putrefying corpses fertilize ground for our crops. We shall come back later to many another wheel in the head, e.g. those of vocation, truthfulness, love, etc. When one's own is contrasted with what is imparted to him, there is no use in objecting that we cannot have anything isolated, but receive everything as a part of the universal order, and therefore through the impression of what is around us, and that consequently we have it as something imparted, for there is a great indifference between the feelings and thoughts which are aroused in me by other things and those which are given to me. God, mortality, freedom, humanity, etc., are drilled into us from childhood as thoughts and feelings which move our inner being more or less strongly, either ruling us without our knowing it, or sometimes in richer natures manifesting themselves in systems and works of art, but are always not roused, but imparted feelings, because we must believe in them and cling to them. That an absolute existed and that it must be taken in, felt, and thought by us was settled as a faith in the minds of those who spent all the strength of their mind on recognizing it and setting it forth. The feeling for the absolute exists there as an imparted one, and thenceforth results only in the most manifold revelation of its own self. So in Klopstock, the religious feeling was an imparted one, which in the Messiad simply found artistic expression, if, on the other hand, the religion with which he was confronted had been for him only an incitation to feeling and thought, if he had known how to take an attitude completely his own toward it, then there would have resulted, instead of religious inspiration, a dissolution and consumption of the religious itself. Instead of that, he only continued in mature years his childish feelings received in childhood, and squandered the powers of his manhood in decking out his childish trifles. The difference is, then, whether feelings are imparted to me or only aroused. Those which are aroused are my own, egoistic, because they are not as feelings drilled into me, dictated to me, and pressed upon me. But those which are imparted to me I receive with open arms. I cherish in me as a heritage, cultivate them, and am possessed by them. Who is there, and that has never, more or less consciously, noticed that our whole education is calculated to produce feelings in us, i.e., impart them to us, instead of leaving their production to ourselves, however they may turn out? If we hear the name of God, we are to feel veneration. If we hear that of the Prince's Majesty, he is to be received with reverence, deference, submission. If we hear that of morality, we are to think that we hear something inviolable. If we hear the evil one or evil ones, we are to shudder. The intention is directed to these feelings, and he who, e.g., should hear with pleasures the deeds of the bad, would have to be taught what's what with the rod of discipline. Thus stuffed with imparted feelings, we appear before the bar of majority and are pronounced of age. Our equipment consists of elevating feelings, lofty thoughts, inspiring maxims, internal principles, etc. The young are of age when they twitter like the old. They are driven through school to learn the old song, and when they have this by heart, they are declared of age. We must not feel everything and every name that comes before us, what we could and would like to feel threat. E.g., at the name of God, we must think of nothing laughable, feel nothing disrespectful, it being described and imparted to us what and how we are to feel and think at mention of that name. That is the meaning of the care of souls, that my soul or my mind be turned as others think right, not as myself would like it. How much trouble does it not cost one, finally, to secure to oneself a feeling of one's own at the mention of at least this or that name, and to laugh in the face of many who expect from us a holy face and composed expression at their speeches? What is imparted is alien to us, is not our own, and therefore is sacred, and it is hard to work to lay aside the sacred dread of it. Today, one again hears seriousness praised. Seriousness is the presence of highly important subjects and discussions, German seriousness, etc. The sort of seriousness proclaims clearly how old and grave lunacy and possession have already become. For there is nothing more serious than a lunatic where he comes to the central point of his lunacy, then his great earnestness incapacitates him for taking a joke.